In the early 1980s, Miami was ground zero in a drug epidemic that was about to consume the entire state of Florida. Even small coastal communities like Charlotte County were not immune. Picturesque waterways became the entry point for drugs that would be distributed throughout the United States. Law enforcement found themselves overwhelmed, outmanned, and outgunned. But one prosecutor would dedicate himself to bringing drug dealers to justice.
What have we here? Haven't I seen you before? Have you ever seen this before?
Assistant State Attorney Eugene Berry dedicated himself to stemming the flow of drugs. His friend and supervisor was Deputy State Attorney Donald Palekia.
He had a reputation here in this community of being a no-nonsense prosecutor, that he was going to do everything he could to prosecute anyone and everyone involved in drugs, whether they be sellers, traffickers, or users. He had no ambitions other than to be a good prosecutor. He tried a lot of cases. He was constantly in the courtroom trying cases.
Neighbors.
Yeah.
Gene Berry's ambition was to practice law. It was a dream he put off until later in life. He graduated from law school at the age of 41. Soon afterwards, he was hired as an assistant state attorney for Charlotte County, Florida. Berry had seen the effects of drug abuse in his own family. He was determined to use his position as prosecutor to fight the illegal drug trade. Between 1977 and 1981, he won convictions in 90% of his major felony cases. Drug smugglers took notice. They feared Gene Berry and hoped they'd never face him in court.
This is a coke charge, right? Yeah.
Saturday, January 16th, 1982.
Okay.
Gene and his wife Trudy were enjoying a peaceful evening at home. They were interrupted by a knock at the door.
The shots were very loud, I can remember that. There was a lamp on my right which blocked the door, so I couldn't see who had come in. And then I remembered to dial 911, and I told them that Gene Berry had been shot. Then I went and tried to get him to get up.
The first deputies on the scene approached cautiously. They found Trudy kneeling by her wounded husband. She was taken outside so deputies could make sure the attacker was no longer in the house. Paramedics arrived and urgently tried to save Berry.
I saw the paramedics go in with their little bag. And I thought, I'm going with him to the hospital. When they come out bringing Gene, I'm going with them. So I waited, it seemed like an eternity. They came out, but they didn't have Gene. They had their boxes, and that's when I really knew that he was gone.
The state attorney, Joe D'Alessandro, was informed that one of his prosecutors had been shot. He rushed to the scene with his chief investigator, Ralph Cunningham. Berry's supervisor, Donald Palekia, also rushed to the scene. Together, the three men decided that the state attorney's office would take over the investigation.
If a police officer gets killed, the police will turn over every stone on earth. We want to catch the person that killed them. I had a prosecutor killed, thought the same way. I want to catch the person that killed him.
While Trudy did not see her husband's assailant, she was able to provide investigators with a valuable clue.
I heard him say at the door, "Hello, how are you?" And his tone of voice was such that I knew it was a woman. You just know that. And that was all. That was the only word spoken.
What you found? Yes, sir. We look around. We haven't found
Investigators scoured the house for evidence.
The partner's still looking around.
Near the front door, they recovered 3 bullets, including one from the door jamb. Forensic examination revealed the bullets were .38 caliber wad cutters. The bullets are usually used for target practice because of their low cost and easy availability. For other reasons, wad cutters are also the bullet of choice for professional killers. The soft lead slug from the bullet often disintegrates on impact, taking with it important ballistic clues such as rifling. The absence of such clues makes it nearly impossible for a ballistics expert to link a bullet to a particular gun. And it ultimately deprives a prosecutor of a valuable piece of evidence to present to a jury. Barry's neighbors were questioned in the hopes that someone might have heard or seen something that could help investigators.
That night, they began to conduct a survey of the neighborhood to find out if any of the neighbors of Gene saw or heard of anything unusual, including gunshots. We were fortunate to have located some witnesses that could help us, which helped us pinpoint the time.
A local dentist happened to be driving in the area an hour before the murder. He later told police that he had noticed a female jogger near the Barry residence. The jogger was described as a white woman between the ages of 23 and 27, of medium height and build, with long dark hair.
She was on the side of the road.
She wore a dark blue jogging suit.
If you can think of anything else, it's because
The description of the jogger was given to the press. Authorities hoped that the publicity would help to locate her so she could be questioned. When the press asked about a motive for the crime, investigators would not publicly conjecture.
Anything suspicious. I'm hoping somebody's walking their dog or out jogging and saw something in the neighborhood.
Privately, however, they suspected someone in the drug trade, where Barry had made countless enemies. The list of suspects included anyone that Barry had prosecuted or was about to face in court. Chief Investigator Ralph Cunningham led the efforts to identify Barry's murderer.
Being a prosecutor, you had everybody that he's ever prosecuted, everybody that was involved in a case that may, hate him. It involved a lot of potential defendants amongst all those criminal entities. That made it very difficult. As we discussed, it took a long time to sort that out. Where normally you don't have that vast of suspects in a homicide.
Because what I want to do is I want to check.
With little evidence and nearly every criminal in Southwest Florida's drug underworld now a suspect, finding the killer would be a daunting task.
Check everybody.
Assistant State Attorney Eugene Barry was gunned down as he answered a knock at his front door. He was known for his relentless prosecution of drug offenders.
White. She's 5'5".
Chief Investigator Ralph Cunningham began to think about a motive for the killing.
150 pounds. She's
Our starting point was we thought it was probably a retaliation shooting. I had a team of investigators researching all the court files, all the cases that Gene handled. We'll get all the witnesses, all the co-conspirators, everybody involved in those cases, and we'll run them and see where they're at. You know, are they in jail? Are they out? And get all their names.
Among the many leads was a case that Berry would have prosecuted 2 days after the murder. It involved a small-time cocaine dealer named Steven Taylor. When investigators sought to interview Taylor, they learned he had been in a car accident. He was currently hospitalized in Lexington, Kentucky.
Hi, excuse me. Can you tell me
The Florida State Attorney's Office asked Lexington police to visit Taylor at the University of Kentucky Hospital.
Okay, room 110, that's down and to the left.
Come in.
When they arrived, they discovered 2 women visiting Taylor and asked them to leave.
Would you excuse us for a few moments, please? Thank you, if you could just...
They questioned Taylor about his whereabouts on the night of Eugene Berry's murder.
December 12th?
He said he had been at a local saloon where plenty of people saw him. Later that night, he had his car accident. It seemed like a good alibi. Lexington police reported their findings back to investigators in Florida.
I got nothing but alibis, okay?
Ralph Cunningham and his team noted the information and continued to study Berry's cases. Among the hundreds of past cases was one involving Mike Kelly.
Did you ever stop to think of all the lives of people you're changing?
3 months before Berry's murder, Kelly was convicted on drug trafficking and conspiracy charges for attempting to smuggle 17 tons of marijuana into Florida. Kelly was alleged to be part of a Kentucky-based drug cartel. He was sentenced to 45 years. At the time of the murder, Kelly was in prison. He was waiting for his appeal to be processed. When Kelly's jail records were studied, an interesting fact came to light. Mike Kelly and Steven Taylor briefly served time in the same jail wing. Further investigation revealed that Taylor was able to get out of jail because Mike Kelly's wife posted a $12,000 bond for Taylor. Investigators found the connection between the Kellys and Steven Taylor suspicious. They asked the Lexington authorities to question Mike Kelly's wife, Bonnie. Bonnie Kelly said on the night of Gene Berry's murder, she was in Lexington. She discussed insurance with a man named Henry Vance, who could corroborate her story.
Yes, Kim.
Henry Vance was well connected in Kentucky's political circles.
Yeah, they've got the
He was a former aide to a governor.
conservationists. I think that they're pretty happy with that.
Currently, he was working for the House Speaker in the Kentucky legislature.
They're right there.
He was also licensed to sell insurance. Henry Vance later corroborated Bonnie Kelly's story. Blocked by their alibis, Investigator Cunningham tried to approach the investigation from another angle. He began profiling the type of killer he was looking for.
We would assume that the person probably came in from out of the area to do a hit. We really were a pretty peaceful community until the drug smuggling started. So, I thought that it would probably have been someone from out of town that came in.
If Cunningham's profile was correct, the killer would have had to somehow travel in and out of the area.
Do something.
They also would have needed accommodations.
I think she said it was sort
So immediately, I wanted to know who arrived on any aircraft, for 48 hours before, who departed 48 hours afterwards. So we subpoenaed all the transcripts from all the airlines that came to Southwest Florida, which is thousands and thousands.
Cunningham also subpoenaed records from all the local car rental agencies.
We did the same thing with motels. Everybody that stayed in a motel, we got their name. And the idea was to put all these names together and then try to start correlating, you know, some likeness, something that we could sink our teeth in. Probably the most complex project was to get all the telephone calls from all the phone booths between North Naples and Punta Gorda, Charlotte County, which is about 80 miles.
The subpoenaed records produced a staggering amount of data that had to be processed. Because the case involved a fallen colleague, all hands at the state attorney's office pitched in. Among them was Ed Gale, who worked in the intelligence unit.
I would be surprised if anybody there was putting in less than 18 hours a day. I'd be very, very surprised. That was probably the general rule.
Investigators were sifting through the reams of data, looking for any suspicious activity or unusual patterns.
Really, we were looking for persons that we couldn't identify. We took all the people we could identify first that were legitimate. And then we had a few that jumped out that we never could run down. We had this Brenda Rankin that flew in, but we never could identify her. We couldn't see that she exists.
Investigators followed up on all suspicious coincidences. It was a painstaking task.
Okay, let's see if we can sum up what we
As the state attorney's office processed the mounds of data, patterns emerged.
got and where.
Investigators discovered a series of phone calls from nearby Florida phone booths to the Lexington, Kentucky area. One call was made about an hour after the murder. It originated outside a Sarasota, Florida hotel. The number dialed was a Kentucky payphone within walking distance of Mike Kelly's home.
So that puts Mike Kelly here.
When we identified some of those calls, they came back to the Kelly group. So I felt quite confident at that time, very early in the case, that they were involved.
The investigation now had a focus.
Making calls to.
Further analysis of phone records bolstered suspicions about a relationship between the Kellys and Steven Taylor.
When we started getting our telephone records in, compiling those records, we were able to come up with calls to Mr. Kelly's home and calls from Mr. Taylor's home to Kentucky. We were able to then correlate, hook Mr. Taylor in with those calls.
Investigator Cunningham went to the Sarasota hotel.
I've got some photos here.
The hotel's clerks were shown photos of Mike Kelly's known associates.
Anybody from any of these photos.
A hotel clerk recognized one of the photos. It was of Bonnie Kelly, Mike Kelly's wife. The clerk said the woman in the photo checked in under the name Brenda Rankin, a name which had also surfaced during a search of airline passenger lists, but had been unaccounted for.
Okay, thank you very much.
Investigators theorized that Rankin was an alias for Bonnie Kelly. The clerk also told investigators that a black man using the name Joe Rankin checked in with the woman. The hotel registrations with the names Brenda and Joe Rankin were taken as evidence. Bonnie Kelly was now a prime suspect. Investigators began tracking her movements throughout Florida. Their surveillance revealed she traveled with suspected co-conspirator Steven Taylor and frequently used payphones.
Every time you would see Bonnie when we were surveilling her, she would always have this bag of money to pay for the phone tolls. And unbeknownst to her, every one of those could be traced.
The calls were traced to known drug dealers. Although the calls were traced, they were not recorded. Investigators guessed that Bonnie Kelly was seeking help from former associates of her husband, Mike Kelly. One of Kelly's calls was placed to a major drug dealer who used the name Curly. Curly allegedly supplied the 17 tons of marijuana at the center of Mike Kelly's conviction.
I want my money.
Curly was certain that Bonnie's calls to him were being traced. He wanted no part of the intense scrutiny that comes with being involved in the murder of a law enforcement officer. He contacted investigator Ralph Cunningham. Their paths had crossed before.
Now, he strictly was a business person. He was a dope smuggler. But he had a family, and he didn't want anything to do with the murder. He also didn't want to end up being in jail for the drug smuggling thing. So he's seen a little window of opportunity to try to help himself by helping us.
Curly said Bonnie Kelly admitted shooting Gene Barry. She wanted Curly to give her money so she and Taylor could flee the country. A deal was struck. Curly offered to set up a meeting with Kelly and tape it for investigators. In exchange, Curly would not be prosecuted on drug smuggling charges for the 17 tons of marijuana. Several meetings were arranged, but each time, Kelly backed out at the last minute.
I think she was afraid that maybe he'd have her killed. She wanted the money, but she knew she was flirting with danger. Anytime you're trying to extort money out of a drug kingpin, you know, it's not a good thing to do.
The information Curly provided about Bonnie Kelly was the first bit of evidence that directly implicated her in the murder of Gene Barry. For his cooperation, he would not be prosecuted for the drug charges.
And we ultimately gave immunity for that dope deal. Told him, you know, he was getting a shot, once in a lifetime shot to walk away from. But if we seen each other again in South America, he could expect me to be shooting, and I would be expecting he was going to be shooting. So we just left on those terms.
That might be in question here.
The local dentist who had seen the female jogger on the night of the murder was shown 6 photos of various women, including one of Bonnie Kelly. The dentist could not positively identify Kelly as the jogger, but he did, however, say her photo was the one that most closely resembled the person he had seen.
Thank you.
The exhaustive investigation into the murder of Eugene Barry yielded 2 major suspects, but both had alibis. Surveillance revealed Taylor and Bonnie Kelly were now romantically involved. Field investigators waited for one of them to slip up or commit another crime. Meanwhile, other investigators compiled more circumstantial evidence against the 2 suspected killers. They hoped the suspects could be taken into custody before they obtained enough money to flee the country. Florida prosecutor Gene Barry was murdered as he answered a knock at his front door. Bonnie Kelly and Steven Taylor were the leading suspects in the murder. They knew they were being watched by authorities. They hoped to scrape together enough money to flee the country. Investigators needed more evidence to arrest them. They began by asking Lexington, Kentucky police to question the man who supplied Kelly's alibi, political aide Henry Vance.
He said that he met with her approximately 6:40 p.m. on the night of the shooting. Knowing what we knew about Bonnie at that time, it caused us to question his truth and veracity in the matter.
Bonnie eventually left Florida and returned to Kentucky. investigators continued to keep Taylor under surveillance.
We decided that we would really key on Taylor, that he was a weak link. He was involved in the homicide. He knew what was going on. We know he wasn't a shooter. So at best, you know, he was in on an accessory before the fact, you know, before the homicide.
Then investigators got a break. They spotted Taylor with a concealed weapon.
Exact address, yeah. Exact address.
They followed him until he entered their jurisdiction and arrested him.
Taylor, we see your hand.
Once we got into our jurisdiction, we stopped him, and we got him carrying the guns, and we got him with some drugs.
With the new charges of illegal gun and drug possession, investigators let Taylor know he was a leading suspect in the Eugene Berry murder. The death penalty was a strong possibility.
Steven Vance Taylor.
Taylor and his lawyers sat down with Cunningham to try to work out a deal.
We had him in a tight spot.
I wasn't there.
He started off with his attorneys trying to negotiate a deal, a good deal for himself. I mean, he wanted to walk out of this thing completely. But I wasn't about to do that.
Taylor told the investigators that he knew the identity of the man who was with Bonnie Kelly on the night of the murder. He would not reveal more unless he would be given full immunity in the case.
At that time, I said, well, let's take a little break from our interview. And I went out in the hallway and went down to the library and made a phone call back to the command headquarters.
Cunningham spoke with investigator Ed Gale, who brought his attention to a suspect that investigators had been unable to locate for questioning. His name was Richard Hollowman.
Initially, Hollowman's name first appeared as being one of the persons that was spending a lot of time with Mike Kelly and Vance Taylor in the jail.
Ed Gale told Cunningham that he had recently found more evidence implicating Hollowman as a co-conspirator.
Unbeknownst to most people, security at the airport go through the parking lot and record all license numbers of all cars once a day, approximately 11 to 12 o'clock at night, to see what vehicles are there, if there are any stolen vehicles, etc. When we were able to get those records and found a car there that was registered to Richard Hollowman, so his name popped up there as being at the airport. And that was consistent with the time that Brenda Rankin came in on an airplane. We wanted to talk to Hollowman, but he was nowhere to be found.
Look, I'm going to go back in.
Cunningham had a strong suspicion that Richard Hollowman was involved in the shooting,
This is great.
but he needed evidence to confirm it,
Thanks, Ed. I'll give you a call, okay? Yeah.
and he did not want Steven Taylor to walk free.
I went back in and started our interview. I said, I'm giving you an opportunity to try to cooperate, to have some reduction in your time. You don't want to take that. All you're doing is lying. And his attorney said, oh, no, he's telling the truth. I said, look, we have already taken a sworn statement from Hollowman. We know who the co-conspirator is, and we're going to charge you with first-degree murder as a principal. Well, then, dead silence. So I knew, well, we had him.
But by then, the deed is done. What was I going to do?
Cunningham's tactic worked, and Taylor agreed to cooperate in exchange for being allowed to plead guilty to second-degree murder, which could not be punished by the death penalty.
I didn't know what they were going to do.
Taylor explained that Kelly's initial target had been a woman who was working as an informant for the police.
The sheriff's department had used her, wired her up, and she went in and bought dope from drug dealers. Taylor was one of these cases, and these cases were being tried by Gene Berry, and we had several of them in the system at that time. Absent the informant, you had no case.
But the informant was protected by police detectives and was being kept at a secret location. So Kelly decided to move on to her secondary target, Gene Berry. Taylor revealed that he had staged the car accident on the night of Eugene Berry's murder.
I introduced him to Bonnie.
He told investigators that Henry Vance, the politically well-connected businessman, helped him to arrange the accident. Taylor also said that Vance provided Bonnie Kelly with more than just an alibi. He supplied the murder weapon. Vance allegedly instructed Kelly to use wad cutter bullets, which were harder to trace back to a particular weapon. The gun itself was said to have its serial numbers filed off so it couldn't be traced. Kelly was also told to aim for the head and chest and to make sure Berry was dead before leaving the scene. Steven Taylor gave investigators new insight into the details of the murder plot, including information about Richard Hollowman's involvement. Taylor explained that before he bonded out of jail, he met Hollowman, who was serving 60 days for failure to pay child support. After Hollowman was released, Taylor arranged for him to be Bonnie Kelly's driver while she was in Florida. In exchange, Taylor promised to make him part of his drug distribution ring. Investigators finally located Hollowman and brought him in for questioning. They believed that while Hollowman was definitely involved in the murder, he played a supporting role.
And once he realized he was just being used, and he was kind of at peace with himself and was easy to work with and very cooperative.
Hollowman gave the authorities a sworn statement. He, too, pled guilty to the lesser charge of second-degree murder in exchange for his testimony. Hollowman explained that he knew Bonnie Kelly under the alias Brenda Rankin. Steven Taylor had never told him Bonnie Kelly's real name. Hollowman was paid $1,000 for his driving services over a period of a few days. Investigator Cunningham flew to Kentucky and arrested Bonnie Kelly. Prosecutors were confident they had their killer. Kelly would face charges of first-degree murder for the death of Assistant State Attorney Gene Berry. But prosecutors grew concerned about the credibility of their two key witnesses. Two criminals who were testifying to save themselves from the death penalty. Bonnie Kelly's trial began on April 29, 1983, a year and 3 months after the murder of Eugene Berry. One of the prosecutors was Gene Berry's supervisor, Deputy State Attorney Donald Pellecchia.
It was the most pressure that I've had as a prosecutor on a case. I can remember a few days before the trial, Ralph coming to me and said, "Don't blow this case. Don't lose this case." And there was no way I was going to go into the courtroom with anything but that pressure on me of knowing that everyone was counting on us to get a conviction in this case with the evidence that we had. And that was a great deal of pressure because he was a friend, because he was somebody that I worked with, and because he was law enforcement.
The case would be co-prosecuted by both Pellecchia and State Attorney Joe D'Alessandro. The prosecution presented a litany of witnesses who worked for phone companies in the area. The witnesses detailed calls made around the time of Eugene Berry's murder, from Florida payphones to Kentucky payphones. Witnesses from airlines detailed passenger manifests that implicated Bonnie Kelly.
No, sir.
And the dentist who saw the female jogger on the night of the murder also testified.
I remember passing a jogger, and I noticed the jogger because it was really late, and she was wearing sunglasses.
But the defense questioned how he could be so certain of what he saw in the dark the night of Eugene Berry's murder.
Would you say it's fair, Dr. White?
The prosecution had presented its circumstantial evidence to the jury. They were concerned that the defense had poked holes in the testimony of the dentist.
Could have been somebody else.
Could have been.
Right.
Next, the prosecution would begin calling Kelly's alleged co-conspirators to the stand. The first was Steven Taylor.
Swearing to tell the truth.
Prosecutors were concerned about Taylor.
Yes.
They were unsure that his testimony would match the stories he told in his interviews.
I never felt comfortable with anything Taylor said until after he said it. I assumed that I would have the testimony he had given to me previously, but I was very, very worried when he was on the stand. He did testify the way he had told us he would testify prior to the trial.
Taylor testified that Kelly had discussed killing Gene Berry.
The defendant. Yes.
The reason? She didn't want to see Taylor put in jail by the same prosecutor who had put her husband away for 45 years.
I don't know. I know why she said that she wanted to kill Gene Berry, because she hated him. She hated him. Witness, Counselor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
The defense immediately attacked Taylor's credibility.
Mr. Taylor.
The jury was
were
reminded
indicted
that Taylor
for
was testifying to get a lesser sentence.
You understand the difference, do you not, between first-degree and second-degree murder?
Yes, sir.
First degree carries the death penalty.
Yes, sir.
Second degree does not carry the death penalty.
Yes, sir.
And it was you, Mr. Taylor, who would have benefited
The
from the
defense
death
pointed
of
out
Linda
that
Bailey, was
he,
it not?
not Bonnie Kelly, would have benefited from the death of Gene Berry.
It was you, Mr. Taylor, who benefited, if you can call it that, from the death of Gene Berry.
Benefited?
Well, you got what you wanted. Your continuance was granted, wasn't it, Mr. Taylor?
That wasn't the reason. I didn't plan to kill Gene Berry.
You got your continuance by virtue of his death.
Of course it was continued.
And it was you and no one else, Mr. Taylor, except for you, that could have benefited from that death. Isn't that right?
I don't know why he was killed.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Very well.
Next, the prosecution called Richard Hollowman to the stand. He was the driver for Bonnie Kelly the night that Gene Berry was murdered. The prosecution hoped that the jury would find Hollowman more credible than Taylor. With State Attorney Joe D'Alessandro questioning him, Hollowman testified about leaving jail and being contacted by Taylor to drive Bonnie Kelly.
Yes, sir, it does. And I knew that he was paid.
Hollowman testified that he picked up Bonnie Kelly, who was using the alias Brenda Rankin, at the airport. It was 19 hours before the murder of Gene Berry. Hollowman said that she found Berry's address simply by looking it up in the phone book. They used a map to locate his house. As evening fell, Kelly donned a blue jogging suit and a dark wig.
Yeah, I'm ready.
She began a practice run to case the house. The prosecutors believe that's when the local dentist saw her as he drove by.
So what happened next?
With the practice run completed, it was time for Kelly to commit the crime.
So later that night, we drove back by there and she put on the wig and she pulled out her gun.
What kind of gun was it?
I think it was a revolver. It looked like a snub nose. I mean, I didn't sign on to kill anyone. So I told her that, you know, I didn't want to do it, that I thought it was a bad idea, and she said that everything would be fine and she would take care of it. So she put on the wig and she got out of the car.
Hollowman described waiting on a side street for Kelly to return when he heard gunshots. He started driving away when he saw Kelly in his headlights. Once in the car, Hollowman said, Kelly described the details of the murder. She ran up to the front door and knocked. When the prosecutor answered, she shot him twice. As he tried to run back into the house, she stepped inside and fired the gun 2 more times.
Come on, get in the car! Come on!
Kelly began disposing of the evidence as they got further away from the scene of the crime. Hollowman said he saw Kelly throw what he believed to be the murder weapon into a Salt Creek. While he did not see the gun, she told him that she needed to dispose of something in salt water.
Both of her and...
Investigators were not able to recover the weapon.
I agreed to drive her around.
The defense attacked Hollowman's credibility, as they had done with Steven Taylor.
Hollowman, your memory of the events seems to be quite sharp, especially the point where Mr. Barry answers the door, almost as if you were there yourself.
I was not, sir.
Yes, that's been...
The defense also tried to show a close tie between Taylor and Hollowman and their planned drug
You
business.
also have an arrangement, and you've known Mr. Taylor for a while, haven't you?
Yes, sir.
All right, where did you and Mr. Taylor meet again, please?
We met in lockup.
Right. Okay, and how long would you say you've known him? How long has that been?
I'd say maybe close to a year or so.
You talked about forming a partnership, right?
Yes, sir. And drugs.
Right. A Taylor-Hollowman partnership.
He was leading, I was the seller.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
The prosecution next sought to counter the doubts raised by the defense's questioning.
Whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Please be seated.
I want to show you a few documents that my office...
They called a document analyst with the crime laboratory of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in Tampa.
Okay, I'd like to show you these 3 documents. Would you please examine them? Okay, what are those 3 documents?
These are 3 items that were sent to me that I have reviewed.
He analyzed known handwriting samples from Bonnie Kelly and the hotel registration she allegedly filled out with the name Brenda Rankin.
Are these the 3 documents?
The analyst testified that the address on the registration card matched Bonnie Kelly's writing sample, but the prosecution's hopes for conclusive proof were dashed. The analyst was forced to admit that he was uncertain if the signature on the hotel record matched her handwriting.
And you got down to this one point. Everything else was great, but this was the pivot. This made or broke it. And there was conflict in that testimony.
The expert's inability to state conclusively that the entire sample had been written by Bonnie Kelly may have raised some doubts with the jury. After presenting witnesses for 2.5 weeks, the prosecution rested.
Please, Your Honor,
The defense rested at the same time, presenting no case of its own. In the defense's final argument, they hammered away at the 2 cornerstones of the prosecution's case, the testimony of Taylor and Hollowman. The jury was reminded of the questionable credibility of the Taylor-Hollowman partnership.
This may be as momentous a decision as you will be ever having to make in your life, I'm sure. And would you make a decision, a business decision, based upon the representations of Mr. Taylor, of Mr. Hollowman? I suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, respectfully, that you would not. How then can you make a decision in this case based upon the representations of a Hollowman-Taylor partnership? Respectfully,
The prosecution was scheduled to begin its closing remarks the next day. With his key witnesses under attack and doubts raised by the prosecution's own handwriting analyst, Joe D'Alessandro needed a break to shore up his case against Bonnie Kelly. Bonnie Kelly was on trial for the murder of prosecutor Gene Berry. The prosecution was worried about its case because of the defense's aggressive cross-examination of witnesses. The credibility of key witnesses was now in question. The night before the prosecution was set to deliver its closing remarks, they stumbled upon a new piece of evidence.
I don't know, it was 2, 3 in the morning. And we just going over this pivotal point. And Ed said, wait a minute, I think I've seen that address. He goes in this box like a human computer, pulls this thing out.
It was the address of one of Bonnie Kelly's relatives. It matched the address written on the hotel's registration.
And what did it was that address that was put on that, which turned out to be someone in Bonnie's family. And that substantiates that she made up that lie at that time.
In its closing remarks, the prosecution explained to the jury that when a person makes up lies, they tend to weave real experiences or knowledge into them. The fact that the address on the hotel registration was that of a relative of Bonnie Kelly's helped to bolster their claims that she was at the hotel just after Gene Berry's murder. The prosecution agreed with the defense that Steven Taylor was a criminal and would have benefited from Gene Berry being murdered. But they emphasized that it was Bonnie Kelly's finger that pulled the trigger. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before finding Bonnie Kelly guilty of first-degree murder. The jury recommended a sentence of life in prison without parole for 25 years. In a separate hearing, Steven Taylor and Richard Hollowman received their sentences. The judge felt Taylor was more culpable in the murder than Bonnie Kelly and sentenced him to 99 years in prison. The judge praised Hollowman's cooperation and sentenced him to 10 years in prison. 5 years of the sentence was suspended, leaving only 5 years to serve. Mike Kelly, convicted on drug charges, was released on appeal. Testimony from a key witness at his trial was ruled inadmissible. The final loose end in the conspiracy to murder prosecutor Gene Berry was Henry Vance. He allegedly supplied the murder weapon, and it helped to provide alibis for convicted killers Bonnie Kelly and Steven Taylor. It took investigators 5 years, just before the statute of limitations was set to run out, to get an indictment on federal weapons charges. Henry Vance was convicted and received a 15-year sentence, the maximum sentence for the charge. Though the case was solved, Charlotte County and the state of Florida still mourns the loss of their dedicated prosecutor. The state of Florida created the Eugene Berry Award, given to the most outstanding state attorney who is not only skilled, but also cares about the community. The Gene Berry tragedy helps to remind the public that while police officers constantly put their lives on the line, prosecutors also face threats. And sometimes they pay with their lives in the fight for justice.